The best way to learn a language? Immersion, living where the language is spoken and using it every day. But if that's not in the cards for you this year, you can still learn a language the second best way, and that's with Babbel. Be a better you in 2024 with Babbel, the science-backed language learning app that actually works. Don't pay hundreds of dollars for private tutors or waste hours on apps that don't really help you speak the language. Babbel's quick 10-minute lessons are handcrafted by over 200 language experts to help you start speaking a new language in as little as 3 weeks. Babbel's designed by real people for real conversations. Babbel's tips and tools are approachable, accessible, rooted in real-life situations, and delivered with conversation-based teaching so you're ready to practice what you've learned in the real world. For instance, I've been using Babbel's convenient courses to help me learn basic conversational skills in German while I'm getting ready for a little trip I'm planning. It's not a language I'd ever studied before, but I find the lessons really easy and kind of like hand-holding me through learning a completely new language to me. And it's reassuring to know that with the help of Babbel, I'll be able to greet people, order food, and ask for directions without having to consult language apps while I'm in Deutschland. I'm still learning. Studies from Yale, Michigan State University, and others continue to prove Babbel is better. One study found that using Babbel for 15 hours is equivalent to a full semester at college. Babbel has over 16 million subscriptions sold. Plus, all of Babbel's 14 award-winning language courses are backed by their 20-day money-back guarantee. Here's a special limited-time deal for our listeners. Right now, get up to 60% off your Babbel subscription, but only for our listeners at babbel.com/vulgar. Get up to 60% off at babbel.com/vulgar, spelled BABBEL.com/vulgar. Rules and restrictions may apply.
Do you know what lies within nothing?
No.
Do you know where it ends? Do you want to know?
Yes. Counterbalance, a high fantasy audio drama. Season 2, coming 15th of October 2023. Learn more on trilunas.com.
Hi, Tits Out Brigade. It's me, Anne. I wanted to let you know about a fundraiser that I'm doing all this month, the month of April 2023. Trans rights are under attack seemingly everywhere, particularly in the United States. That's been in the news lately, but it's an issue all over the place. And I, as a person, and this podcast as an entity, we stand with all trans people everywhere. And so to raise some money, I'm running this fundraiser all month called Tits Out for Trans Rights. So you can get all the details if you go to vulgarhistory.com/donate. That's vulgarhistory.com/donate. It's two-pronged, the fundraiser. So first of all, I'm raising money for the Trevor Project, which is an American organization that supports LGBTQ plus people. And then also I've got a new item in the merch store, which is an item featuring trans icon, the Chevalier Dayon, who I talked about in an episode last season with guest host Maya Dean. And all the proceeds from sales of the Chevalier Dayon merchandise this month is going to be donated to Point of Pride, which is another American organization that helps support trans people. If there's another organization that you're planning to support this month anyway, somewhere close to home, something that is meaningful to you that supports trans people, there's a form also on my website where you can just list what the donation was and who you gave the money to. So at the end of the month, I can give a grand total of how much the Tits Out Brigade was able to raise as part of this fundraiser. Also, for everybody who wants to, I will give you a shout out to all the people who donate in a later episode of Vulgar History. So again, you can get all the details of this fundraiser at vulgarhistory.com/donate. Tits Out for Trans Rights. Hello and welcome to Vulgar History, a feminist women's history comedy podcast. My name is Anne Foster, and this is a big one. Today we're going to be talking, in the first of 3 episodes, about Catherine de' Medici, who was the Queen of France and then kind of was the government of France in a way that I'll explain to you later. She was one of the most consequential women of Renaissance Europe, and you never know it when you see how her life started off as a little baby orphan. So this is the Mary Queen of Scots season. There's something about Mary Queen of Scots, and Mary Queen of Scots spent her formative years growing up at the French royal court. Catherine de' Medici being there, of course. And so this is really putting just some pieces into place. When we get to the Mary Queen of Scots episode, which is going to be coming a bit later, you can really understand Mary and where she's coming from and what her influences were and kind of what role models she had around her when she was growing up. And so because this story is so big and it involves a lot of European history that I am not as familiar with as my guest. So I've brought on Lana Wood Johnson, friend of the podcast, frequent co-host, on to help really to talk about this, because honestly, Lana and I, we talk about Catherine de' Medici a lot, like even outside of this podcast. Like before I had this podcast, we just love her messiness, her resiliency, the scandals that surround her. So anyway, I'm really excited to have Lana here for part 1 of 3 of Catherine de' Medici. So enjoy part 1. So, hello and welcome to Vulgar History, a feminist women's history comedy podcast. My name is Anne Foster, and this is a big one. We're going for a heavy hitter. So this season there's something about Mary Queen of Scots, and we're slowly sort of building out what her world was before we actually get to the Mary Queen of Scots episodes. And we've talked about her grandmother, we've talked about her mother, and in talking about her mother, we get into the diggies of it all. There's going to be a lot of diggies action this week, which is why Lana Wood Johnson is here again. Lana, hello.
Hello.
There's so much diggies. I was going through a biography, a newer biography of we're talking about Catherine de' Medici, Catherine de' Medici. My pronunciation is based on, as you know, the television show Reign. And on that show, which was on for 4 seasons, everyone called her the de' Medici. But apparently it's Medici.
De' Medici.
Please correct me when I say it incorrectly. But also, that's where I learned the name. So I had never heard of her. I'd never heard of Catherine de' Medici until I was watching Reign. I really didn't know a lot about Mary Queen of Scots until I was watching Reign, honestly. And that's what got me interested in her. Anyway, Lana, hi.
Hi.
We both set aside several hours today to record this. This is going to be more than one episode.
I have a feeling you're going to make me do one whole episode on my sliding glass doors theory. So,
Yeah, no, there's going to be a lot. Although it was interesting. So I wrote about Catherine de' Medici several years ago. And then I was like, well, let's look at what new biographies have been published about her since then. And so I was looking at, it's called Blood, Fire, and Gold by Estelle Perrin, which is interestingly, it's a co-biography of Catherine de' Medici and Elizabeth I. And initially I was like, okay, I was kind of breezing through the Elizabeth I chapters because it was just kind of like parallel lives. But then suddenly they entwine, the stories entwine, and then they have a lot to do with each other for the last 2/3 of the book. Anyway, so I was looking at that last night and I was like, oh, this is the first time, when I first read about Catherine de' Medici, I was just kind of teaching myself, who is this? So I sort of focused just on her and what she was up to. But now with a broader understanding of what was going on, I was like, oh, the de Guise family is everywhere. There's just de Guising.
in every closet, in every shady hallway.
They're starting a new religious war by killing a bunch of people repeatedly.
Look, you got a thing, you go with it, all right?
It's the trademark move. It's the de Guise. It's instigating a religious war. It happens, I think, 3 times.
When in doubt, religious massacre.
Yeah, because I knew about the Queen Margot one, but I'm like, oh, there was others. Anyway, so thank you, Lana, because now I understand more fully what we're going to talk about today. When we get to the de Guise related stuff.
I do find it amusing that you had me on for the Marie de Guise episode where we talked almost exclusively about Scotland. And now we're having the Catherine de' Medici episode, who is an Italian woman, and we're talking almost exclusively about France.
Yes, actually, I want to, just before we get into Catherine herself, I do want to mention she was Italian. And that I just kind of want to give an overall caveat for a couple of things. So she was an Italian person in France. And so there's xenophobia aimed towards her whole life. There's people who are thinking, oh, the Italians. A lot of the stuff about her, was she casually interested in poisons? Yes. Was she very superstitious, and was she into sort of her version of kind of new agey medicine? Yes. But the fact that she was Italian, people just all over the place were just being like, oh, she must have poisoned them because that's what Italians do. Okay, that's part one. That's part one. While she was still alive, people were sort of thinking the worst of her because of just being prejudiced against Italians. After she died, when there was a new dynasty that took over, the Bourbons, they really wanted to vilify her and everything she stood for. So a lot of the records we have about her were written after the fact by people who had a motivation to make her sound just unhinged. So kind of in this episode, like, well, hopefully we can kind of talk about like on a scale of whatever, 0 to 10, how likely is this one scandalous detail to be true, given that a lot of what we know about her was written by people who hated her for one or two pretty substantial reasons.
I love that all of your knowledge about her comes from basically fanfic.
Yeah. Yeah.
Queen Margot fanfic, Reign fanfic.
Yeah. And so I was coming into it just being like, oh man, this woman, like I knew about her from Reign. I knew about her from the movie Queen Margot, which was based on the novel, which was itself fanfic. So I was coming like, oh yeah, she's this cool woman. She's running around. She's murdering people. And it's like, well, yes, kind of. But also that is based on just a lot of people who had reasons to hate. It's like if you're reading The Other Boleyn Girl by Philippa Gregory. It's like, oh, Anne Boleyn, she had 6 fingers. She had sex with her brother. It's just like, oh, you're just making everything that all the people who hated her, it's like she was a witch. It's that same thing, right?
But you don't get those stories about you unless you're a very powerful, very, very influential woman. Like, that you even have that level of stories means you did something right with your life.
Exactly. It's the same as
or terribly, terribly wrong.
Yeah, true. Like you did something, like you stood out in some way that was disconcerting to the men who were writing your records. Like it's the same thing as like, I don't know, Cleopatra, Harem Sultan, like anyone who history is written about, like maybe she was a witch. It's like, or was she just a woman who acted like you didn't think women should? Like anytime it's someone's like, maybe she was a witch, I'm like, okay. Like, sure. Anyway, so what is your knowledge based on for Catherine de Medici? Where do you know her from?
Once again, I obsessively read the Antonia Fraser Mary Queen of Scots book every month for the entirety of 7th grade. Just for funsies. Checked it out from the library. Would just read it over and over and over again. It was my heart. So that's where my knowledge of Mary Queen of Scots starts. But it does not end there, because I also then paid an exorbitant amount of money to be told how early modern European royals lived. And sometimes I'd get to learn about other things. But, for the most part, it's about the royals and the nobles and the important families. And now I have a very fancy history degree that stands on my wall as I do IT work.
Well, for a long time, I had a fancy history degree in my closet while I did librarian managerial tasks. So here we both are.
We studied the same era of history, but we studied very different places in it. So we complement each other quite well with our knowledge.
Well, and I was thinking too, like so you were here for the Marie de Guise episodes, like we're doing God knows how many episodes this is going to turn into about Catherine de Medici. And then you are going to be coming back for an undisclosed later episode too. So we talked about this when we did the Lady Jane live stream a while ago, but could you explain, Lana, your important role as the muse for why this podcast exists at all?
So I was thinking about maybe starting a podcast, and Anne goes, I should also start a podcast. Why would I start a podcast? Well, you and I were plotting, trying to figure out a way for you to get a book written about Caroline of Brunswick, who is our favorite human ever to have existed at this point. Maybe not favorite, but like really up there at the time. And you didn't have the platform yet. And you're like, I should start a podcast. What kind of podcast? And so we talked about it, and you started this one and I started none. Mm-hmm. But, who knows?
But I think I also remember in that conversation, you had said something like, if you were going to start a podcast where it was like 2 people sharing stories back and forth, you were like, it'd probably be me who you would do that with. And so I love that we're kind of like, we're kind of doing that now in like half of this season.
I'm also your unofficial, your official Habsburg whisperer your DeGee's Whisperer,
Yeah.
and random other, like, I just want to go on record as saying Shishi and Queen Min were my suggestions because I also studied East Asian history. So
No, you're very good at when Lana suggests somebody that would be good for the podcast, I know to take this seriously because you know exactly what sorts of stuff gets me excited.
I'm on the the lowest rated so far. Today is my comeback, but I love the weird chaos demon people, but also like I know what a hardcore high scorer is going to look like on your episode.
Well, and Lana also is, you help out with the website. So you're actually currently very intimately familiar with the Scandalicious scale, which you just figured out a way to make it be on the website. So if people are interested to see where your favorite ranks, you can actually see that list now at vulgarhistory.com.
I do need to put the proper title on there. So hopefully by the time this airs, it'll have the proper Queen Fredegund.
Here's the thing. So with the scores, the Scandalicious scale scores, which are... I started doing it just as like a nice way to wrap up every episode. And I do think in the first season or two, I was like very cautious. I didn't want to be like 40, everyone's 40, because then that's not fun. So I think especially hard on early on people. Like some of the scores, when I look at them now, I'm just like, really? That's where I put Caroline of Brunswick. That's where I put Frances Howard. That's where I put Cleopatra. But so the scores are, subjective. But the other thing to remember, and I know that you have a much more math-friendly brain than I do, Lana.
She handed me a Google Doc that just had the titles, and they were vaguely in numerical order. They weren't alphabetized. They weren't like numerical and then alphabetized. They were a Google Doc quiz, so I couldn't like sort it or anything. And there weren't any of the sub numbers. It was just the final total. And I'm like, I'm going to have to listen back through every single episode and get all of the numbers because this hurts my soul.
Yeah. So when people in the past have said like, oh, is the Scandalicious scale anywhere for me to look at? And I'm like, no, because it's in this Google Doc that is just becoming more and more unwieldy. What I had done when I sent it to you, Lana, I cleaned it up a bit because the official one that I look at is each person is color coded by which season they're from. So I'm
also like I have grand plans for your website that like I told her she can pay me more money if she needs things urgently, but if she just lets me play with it, I will make the coolest website ever. So.
And that's the option I'm going with. But yeah, it was nice to see the scale, but also just like looking at it again, I'm just like, what? But yeah, no, because what I do is I just say the score. Like, I need to really emphasize how much I've been doing this show now for 6 seasons, and there's like some things about it that are more elevated than when I began. Like Christina is the editor now. Like I use better software to record with. But it's also very much just me in my spare time at my kitchen table while Hepburn, my cat, walks back and forth across my keyboard, just doing stuff. So when I say the score, I just enter in the Google sheet and I'm just like, okay, life goes on. And in the back of my brain somewhere, I was like, maybe one day some super fan is going to make a Reddit
If
thread.
There's a super fan out there that already has all of the numbers in a spreadsheet, I love you. Please send them.
I think there might be someone, because I remember somebody told me once that they were listening and then they were doing their own scores before they heard my scores and they're comparing their scores to my scores. So I think someone out there might have those numbers.
Super fans are my people.
Yeah, exactly. And we are both Catherine de Medici super fans, and here we are.
Oh, yes. This is going to be so much.
That's the thing. So even like the Mary Queen of Scots season, I put off doing it for a long time because I knew it was going to be a time. Well, I knew it was going to be a season. I knew it was going to be a time commitment. And someone like Catherine de Medici has been requested frequently to the point like sometimes I like to say like this person suggested it, but it's like numerous people, especially when the Serpent Queen TV show started. People were like, oh, have you not done her yet? I wanted to listen to your episode about her. And I'm just like, no, you don't understand. This is like, if I'm going to do Catherine de Medici, like I need to do it right. And that involves Lana. That involves several hours of time set aside.
What you all don't know is the sheer amount of chats that we've had just about Catherine de Medici for this episode was even suggested before this even was a mote in Anne's eye. We just sit around and talk about Catherine de Medici.
Yeah, she is. I mean, what is it? This Barbie is everything. So, and her husband, Henry, he's just there. So,
not for long.
No, not for long. This was, again, interesting when I was going through this biography, the Estelle Parank biography, how early on in it he died. I was like, oh, wow, that was that. Yeah. Anyway, so we're going to tell you the story because maybe you don't know the story. Actually, Lana, I'll tell you, I had a very interesting message from somebody just this past week who is saying that they don't know the story of Anne Boleyn or Elizabeth I, but they've been listening to my podcast. And so they're just sort of like slowly piecing together based on me talking about these extremely periphery people. And they're like, that's fine. They're enjoying kind of not knowing that. But that made me realize I'm like, oh, because I've been assuming anyone who's like, oh, let's listen to this podcast about like extremely tertiary Tudor people is coming in with having at least watched the musical Six. But so I don't want to assume any knowledge.
You've gone so far past this being basically a Tudor podcast, like so far past that.
Absolutely. And when I'm talking about not the Tudors, like when I was talking about Queen Min, the first episode was basically being like, let me explain the concept of Confucianism. Like when I'm talking about not Tudor England, I explain everything because I need to learn it too. But when we're in this era, I know things and I'm going to try to explain for the people who don't know all this stuff or people who need reminders of everything. And that's kind of where Lana comes in because, you know,
I know so little about so much.
Yeah, whenever we get into this stuff where it's like, well, Italy's not really a country, that's where I'm just like, I can't handle it. Anyway, so
yeah, like I'm sitting here really hard going, no, she's from Florence.
Yeah, no, exactly.
From Florence. It's important.
The other thing I want to mention, so I mentioned that I just, to like refresh my memory, I read this biography, Blood, Fire, and Gold, The Story of Elizabeth I and Catherine de' Medici by Estelle Parank. And that just came out like last year, very recently. And then long ago, where I first kind of learned about Catherine de' Medici was another interestingly dual biography called The Rival Queens, Catherine de' Medici, her daughter Marguerite de Valois, and the Betrayal That Ignited a Kingdom by Nancy Goldstone. So again, like I'm coming into this story sideways because first I watched Reign and then I watched the movie Queen Margot. And then I was like, who is Catherine de' Medici? And then I read a biography that was half about her, half about Margot. So, but this is Catherine's time. So I share it with you, Lena, but my notes are very much just, they're brief and they're also just very Catherine focused because you're coming in with the context of
chaos
of her family, the de Guise family, the Pope. Like that's where you're gonna bring context. So, I want to bring up, you'd be proud of me, Lena. I do have, it's a Google sheet, but it's the timeline of everyone I've ever talked about on the show.
Oh.
And what year they were born and what continent they're from, what year they reigned.
I would like that, please. Thank you.
Yeah. No, it's...
Because I can put that into the website.
For sure. But also I started doing this because I was just curious, like who was around at the same time as who, especially when we're talking about people from different countries and stuff. So Catherine de' Medici, 1519, she was born. So that is, we're in what effectively is known as the Tudor era. Like even though she was in Florence and then France, it's like in terms of just a shorthand, it's like, okay, that's the time period we're looking at.
When you come from it's the Enlightenment for everybody else.
Early modern.
Oh, no, the Renaissance. Sorry, the Renaissance for everybody else.
The Renaissance, yeah. So other people who were around circa this time, Catherine Medici was born 1519. Frances Grey, the mother of Lady Jane Grey, 1517. Marie de Guise, our friend from last time, 1515. It's just all the people I talked about in the Lady Jane Grey season were born around this time. Like Margaret Douglas was born, Catherine Parr was born, Dona Gracia Nasi was born around this time, Harem Sultan Malinzine was in this era. Like it's, so, in England, it's Tudor stuff is happening. In other parts, it's like Isabella in Spain is happening. The Jewish people, the Muslims are being exiled. Like
Isabella's not happening yet, is she?
Isabella, well, I have her on here. Well, yeah, because
isn't Isabella her granddaughter? No, this is a different Isabella. Never mind. Sorry, confusing Isabella is too many Isabellas.
I'm so sorry. No, Isabella of Castile has been happening for quite a while.
Isabella of Castile. Okay. Isabella of Spain, different person. Will come up later.
Isabella and Ferdinand, like they're there. So it's like Saida al-Hura, like she was, you see her, you see Melanzine, you see Doña Gracia Nasi. It's like, okay, yeah, all those people who were kicked out of Spain during the genocide, yeah, they were all around. Melanzine was there, so discovery of the Americas is happening.
This story has so many cameos.
Yeah.
So many cameos.
But just effectively, scrolling through this, effectively half the people I've ever talked about on the podcast were alive during this woman's lifetime. So 1519, she was born April 13th. Guess what? Aries. And I don't know a lot about astrology. I forget if I've said this on this podcast, but I myself have an Aries, and the only astrology I know about is my own, which is Aries. And I feel like Catherine de Medici has big Aries energy. Fire.
Yeah.
Stubbornness. Kind of scary. So she was, I don't know if you have notes or whatever, but what I wrote is just she was the only child of a duke and a countess who were both dead within a month of her birth. Can you explain who her family was?
Okay, so the de Medicis are, I'm going to go a little bit into de Medicis because they're important to various parts of the story. They were, most noble families are, you did some really good stuff in some sort of fighting, and then you got land from it. The de Medicis were a very upstart family. So, we talked about how the de Guises last time were, a new family because they were the second son of a very important family. These people came out of nowhere. They were a banking family that rose to prominence in Florence, Italy. They rose to prominence, and if you on Netflix, there is a Medici TV show, and it's actually reasonably good. Sometimes the history is, iffy, but it kind of gives you gangsters rise to prominence vibes, and that's not entirely wrong. It's that same come from nothing, gain influence in a society, make a really good enemy, in their case Milan, and get your people legitimized through other, through marriage, through connections, through prominent placement. And so they had, let me see. So we're talking about how the de Guises had two cardinals. They had 4 popes.
The Medicis had 4 popes.
The Medicis had 4 popes. There's big de Borgia energy, very big de Borgia energy into this.
And now we're just going to take a break for a word from our sponsors.
As a podcast network, our first priority has always been audio and the stories we're able to share with you. But at Realm, we also sell some pretty cool merch, and organizing that was made both possible and easy with Shopify. When you think about successful businesses like Aloe or Allbirds or Skims, an often overlooked secret is the business behind the business that makes selling and, for shoppers, buying simple. For millions of businesses, that business is Shopify. That's because nobody does selling better than Shopify. It's the home of the #1 checkout on the planet. And the not-so-secret secret that's definitely worth talking about is that Shop Pay boosts conversions up to 50%. That's more happy customers and way more sales going. If you're hoping to grow your business, your commerce platform better be ready to sell wherever your customers are scrolling or strolling, on the web, in your store, in their feed, and everywhere in between. Businesses that sell more, sell on Shopify. Upgrade your business and get the same checkout we use with Shopify. Sign up for your $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/realm, all lowercase. Go to shopify.com/realm to upgrade your selling today. Shopify.com/realm.
Hi, I'm Jennifer, a co-founder of the Go Kid Go Network. At Go Kid Go, putting kids first is at the heart of every show that we produce. That's why we're so excited to introduce a brand new show to our network called The Search for the Silver Lining, a fantasy adventure series about a spirited young girl named Isla who time travels to the mythical land of Camelot. During her journey, Isla meets new friends, including King Arthur and his Knights of the Round Table, and learns valuable life lessons with every quest, sword fight, and dragon ride. Positive and uplifting stories remind us all about the importance of kindness, friendship, honesty, and positivity. Join me and an all-star cast of actors including Liam Neeson, Emily Blunt, Kristen Bell, Chris Hemsworth, among many others, in welcoming the Search for the Silver Lining podcast to the Go Kid Go Network by listening today. Look for The Search for the Silver Lining on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you get your podcasts.
People often look at me with confusion when I ask them what their only one in the room story is. They think it has to be like mine, where I went to a 600-person event and discovered that I was the only Black person there. I know. Horrifying, right? Hi, I'm Laura Cathcart-Robbins, and I am the host and creator of the podcast Only One in the Room. Every week, my co-host Scott Slaughter and I invite you to join us for an hour and lose yourself in someone's only one story. This podcast is for anyone who has ever felt alone in a room full of people, which is to say that this podcast is for everyone.
I'm Brennan Storr.
I'm Paul Bestall.
We're the Ghost Story Guys.
And every 2 weeks, we explore first-person stories of encounters with the paranormal from all around the world.
Then we have some fun reacting to those stories. We like to say our goal is to scare the hell out of you, then make you laugh.
Belief in the paranormal is not required. All you need is a love of great storytelling and curiosity about the world around you.
Come find the Ghost Story Guys on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and everywhere else fine podcasts live, or at ghoststoryguys.com.
And we're back. Yeah, I think I have, and still do in some ways, any Medici, who's not Catherine, I confuse with the Borgias, because I just know it's kind of like Italian adjacent, powerful people, murders are happening, weird sex crimes, like
Popes are having kids.
Yeah.
So the thing that sets Medici apart is that they were very big patrons of the arts.
Mm-hmm.
And so Leonardo da Vinci and like pretty much most of the artists of that time were artists in residence of Florence. That's why like David is in Florence and all of that stuff. Like they collected, they tried to establish their legitimacy as nobles that were doing good for the people by building great works for their community and like supporting art and artists. And so that's part of their identity.
Yeah, no, because you said they were patrons of the arts. And that reminded me, my friend Melanie, who's probably listening. Hi, Melanie. She went to Italy a few years ago. And since I've been doing this podcast and since I've been writing essays and stuff, and she was just like, the name Medici she saw, I think she's in Florence, like everywhere. She's like, they're everywhere. And what I think she was told there by a tour guide or something was, yeah, it's not they weren't just like, oh, I support the arts because I'm like a good person. They were just like, no, I'm going to do this so that my name is everywhere. So everybody thinks we're impressive. And it worked.
Yeah. A good way to lend legitimacy is to be everywhere all of the time. And Florence is de Medici.
Yeah.
Is it a basilica? Is it a cathedral there? But the very big building there has super impressive architecture that was almost impossible for the time. It's a domed building, like a freestanding dome, and it's lasted forever. And that was like the very first de Medici art, like public works project.
Where did their money come from? Do you know?
Banking.
Okay,
they were bankers.
Yeah.
Which is controversial during that time of being money lenders.
Yeah, because it was the whole like Christians aren't supposed to do that situation.
Correct. And that's why they were so Catholic, except for Catherine.
Yeah.
I mean, Catherine was Catholic, but she wasn't she wasn't de Guise Catholic, but
we're going to get into that. Like, honestly, again, like I have to thank you so much for like talking to me for like 2.5 hours about the de Guises. Because when I was reading this biography of Catherine de Medici, when the de Guises came in, I was just like, I know them. And I'm like, I know why they would do that. So it's nice. Hopefully things will come together for the listeners as well.
I really love the de Medicis. So de Medicis and de Guises, and then this is when they start fighting. Like it's kind of like watching an episode of Succession for me.
Yeah, no, this is your thing. Like I could never do this series of episodes without you. Your enthusiasm is crucial because I get so mixed up. Yeah, and so her parents both died. I believe her mother died in some sort of birth-related thing, which I hold firm because my friend Karthika, who is she's a gynecologist, and she knows about. Anyway, she explained to me that basically so many of the women who died in childbirth, it was because no one knew about hand washing. And so the doctors would like handle a cadaver, and then they would reach up inside a woman, deliver a baby, and then the woman would get some sort of horrible infection. and then die. And that's probably why Jane Seymour died, Henry VIII's wife. And that's, anyway, so many women died in childbirth. And there's lots of reasons why people still die in childbirth, but so many people did then. And it was because of hand washing.
No, noble women who had the best doctors, the doctors were killing them. Doctors have been killing women in childbirth way more than midwives, like, because they got rid of the midwives who knew what they were doing. And it's like that same thing happens again in the 1800s when normal people start getting to have doctor access, and it's worse.
Yeah, no, exactly. So Catherine's mother died almost right away in a really, it reminds me of Jane Seymour, Henry VIII's third wife, how she just had a baby and then got a fever and died. And anyway, and then her father died of, I want to say, some sort of disease very shortly after. Like, I don't think he was in battle or anything. I think he just, tuberculosis or whatever, right?
Yeah, I'll double check. But yeah, he died pretty close on there.
Yeah, like she was orphaned by the time she was like 1 month old, which is an interesting parallel with, there's been other babies with dead parents we've talked about. Mary Queen of Scots. This is why babies keep being named King and Queen of Scotland, because parents keep dying.
So her dad, I don't want to brush over some random duke.
Yeah.
For her dad. Her dad had a book written about him, or for him, basically. It was called The Prince, and is written by Niccolo Machiavelli.
Oh yeah, I've heard of that. Yeah.
So
that was her dad?
It was basically tactics from his father, like tactics from his daughter for this guy to, like, for Lorenzo, how he should rule. And so it's written to Lorenzo, to her father.
Okay, that's
on how to be a king. So that gives you context for, like, the family, or, well, to be a duke or to be a leader of people. And so that gives you context for the mentality of this family as well.
The mentality of the family, but also the importance of this family in terms of significance. So yeah.
Oh, his tomb has a Michelangelo on it.
Of course it does.
Like his tomb.
Yeah. So she had these very important parents. She didn't inherit her father's land or title because she was a girl, but her unrecognized claim led to people calling her childhood nickname was the Duchessina. The little duchess, basically.
Do not ask me to do Italian pronunciation. I'm sorry, I failed you all.
I'm not confident at all in my Italian pronunciation. I haven't played enough Mario Brothers to know how to do it very well. So she was the little duchess is what we're going to call her. So she was the little duchess. And she was just this little orphan. And she was sent around to, like, various relatives because even though she was a girl, she was important. And, eventually she's going to marry somebody important. And the de Medicis knew that in a really similar way to the de Guise family with Marie and then with Mary Queen of Scots. So just like, this is a little girl and this is a very important person to marry to somebody.
Her mother was also French.
Ooh.
Like, that's important. That's another important thing that I wanted to point out. Her mother was a French noble, not very high up, not a lot of land, but she had estates. Like, Catherine inherited estates through her mother because, like, her grandparents only had girls and her aunt had no children. So she inherited estates in France through her mother. So she wasn't entirely not French. She just wasn't, French enough.
Well, and this is very, in other stories I've talked about on the podcast, where it's like, I think this was an interview I've done with somebody that just hasn't aired yet. But the concept of where you're from was much more important than, like, oh, your mother was French, but you're from Florence. It's like, okay, you're from Florence. It's like where you're from was much. Today we talk about people like mixed, it's like my father was this and my mother was this. But then it was kind of like you were one thing. Kind of.
You had your loyalty to one thing. You had your culture. You were encultured by one thing.
Yeah, if I may talk in a Star Trek Next Generation metaphor,
always.
It's kind of like if you think about, like, Deanna Troi, who was she was half Betazoid, half human, but very much she was raised in Beta Z. Because she has the, like, mental abilities. Like, she's basically a Betazoid. Like, she's never treated like a human. She doesn't consider herself a human. And then you've got someone like Worf, who is, like, fully blooded, quote unquote, Klingon, but he was raised by humans and he's kind of confused about it. Anyway, so I don't know. On that show, nobody is ever very successful in having two identities, Star Trek Next Generation. They always seemingly have to always choose one or the other. And that's because I've been listening to a podcast called Newbie Star Trek, which I really recommend. Just shout out to Newbie Star Trek. It's a great podcast where they're talking about TNG.
I was also watching TNG and reading Mary Queen of Scots by Antonia Fraser when I was young. So that was my thing.
Here's the thing. Lana and I were destined to become friends and to do this podcast one day. And in between that, were you watching ABC soap operas?
Yes, that is the other thing. Our other bonding point is ABC soap operas.
ABC soap operas of the 90s, yeah. So if we can bring this around to One Life to Live, I'm sure we will. But you know what? This whole story, Catherine's whole deal, the Medicis and everything, like you mentioned Succession, yes, but it's also very much like daytime soap operas. Like
she's Dorian. Like just easy enough to say, like flat out married into the right family, got a lot of power, fought with that family, fought with everybody around her. Didn't get to sleep with Nathan Fillion though. That was sad.
But this is like, it's so much like in those soap operas where here's this, a show like General Hospital too, where it's like, well, the Quartermains have been around since it just started in the 60s. So you just see generation after generation of this extremely wealthy family and how they intermarry with other families. Like, and maybe that's part of where I really vibe with this sort of history because I grew up watching ABC soap operas. And so the scheming of like really wealthy families with other wealthy families and then, pretending you're pregnant and having trouble having babies, like, I'm just like, yep, no, this is it. Yep, I get it. Can I talk, like, we're already going to be here for hours. So can I just mention?
We're just talking forever.
So I'm in Canada. Theoretically, our new monarch is King Charles III. Fundamentally, I can't accept that in my brain. Fundamentally, I can't accept Queen Camilla. Like, that does not compute. But when I was reading about Catherine de Medici, I was just like, oh, this is because when we get into her and her husband, the husband's mistress, I'm like, oh, this is kind of like a Charles, Camilla, Diana dynamic a little bit.
Yeah, but Diana's a good human being.
I know. Catherine is the Diana in the situation. But when we get to Henry's mistress, I'm like, oh, this is a big Camilla sort of thing. Anyway, but this is like...
I like Henry's mistress. Like, of the mistresses that there are, Henry's mistress is like the best.
She is great. So, and I guess I'm getting ahead of myself, but these are just like the way that things that I'm encountering in my life, just the way like so much in this story reminds me of other things that are contemporary, that are current. It's fascinating to me. So Catherine is she's kind of like, okay, we have this baby, the little Duchess, let's just kind of like with the de Guises. It's just like, well, let's just like move her around to live with some other relatives and we'll teach her the ways of how to be a de Medici. Like, let's train her like a little Disney villainess. Several of her relatives kept dying, which just seems just sort of like her early life was just like her being sent to a guardian, that guardian dying, her being sent to another guardian, that guardian dying. I was thinking of it sort of like Lemony Snicket books, but also sort of like, I don't know, Charles Dickensian-esque. It's just this little orphan who's just like, everyone keeps dying. So anyway, so when she was 8 years old, she was kidnapped by enemies of her family. Do you know anything about that? Because all I wrote was enemies by her family. Enemies of her family. But if this is sort of like this mob, right, but it's like these things just happen.
It was probably Milan. Like, when in doubt, it's Milan.
Yeah. Well, but when you were describing the de Medicis as sort of like this, organized crime family, it's like, of course, the little girl was kidnapped. Like, that happens in stories about moms. Anyway, so she was technically... See, this is what's interesting.
Oh, she was taken hostage. She wasn't kidnapped. She was taken hostage.
Yeah, she was imprisoned in a convent, taken hostage, and then kept there.
And ironically, it was actually by the Habsburgs.
Was it?
It looks like.
I was thinking...
Yeah, Charles of Habsburg.
For once, I thought maybe the Habsburgs would not be
involved. He wanted to be Holy Roman... I know, I'm sorry. They're everywhere, and they'll always be everywhere.
Yeah.
Until you just leave Europe.
Yeah. And
then they're nowhere. No, it was Charles of Habsburg, Charles V, wanted to be Holy Roman Emperor, and Pope Clement said no. And so Charles said, all right, well then I'm taking Florence. And he's like, oh, okay, fine. You can be Holy Roman Empire. Give me back my niece.
Yeah. So here's what's interesting. So I looked at these two biographies, so that are both technically split biographies, which is interesting. It's like there is a full biography of Catherine de Medici. It's by Leonie Frida, and that's the basis for the Serpent Queen, the TV show. So like it's just interesting that the people who wrote these books felt the need to make it a dual biography. It's like we need to have her and someone more famous just to like trick people into reading her life story. So what's interesting is Blood, Fire, and Gold very much talks about her as a statesman, if that's the word, her political savvy and that sort of stuff. The Rival Queens, about her and Queen Margot, that's where I got all the like juicy gossipy stuff. Like that's where it's like she was kidnapped, all this stuff. Anyway, Catherine would later recall the years spent imprisoned, like years, like you just described what happened, Lana. But just bear in mind that conversation Lana just recapped, like that was years. To be like, can I be Holy Roman Empire? No. Yes. Like that was years. So anyway, Catherine would later recall the years spent imprisoned in this convent as some of the happiest of her life, which really says a lot about her life.
And her family.
And her family. And yeah.
It's like, oh, convent? Yes.
Yeah, like I can just
relatives.
Yeah. So when she was 10 years old, the city, Florence presumably, was laid siege to by, oh no, this is it. This is what you're talking about. Yeah. So when she was 8 years old, she was kidnapped. And then when she was 10 years old, her city was laid siege to by the Holy Roman Empire.
Just the Habsburgs who wanted to be the Roman Empire.
Yeah. And so they were calling for her to be sort of like a human sacrifice, to be like killed. Anyway, as Lana just described, here's the thing. Also, like people who are listening to this podcast, if you're whatever, how many minutes have we been talking? Like we've been talking for 39 minutes in like an episode about Catherine de Medici, and we just spent 20 minutes talking about Dorian from One Life to Live. Like
we didn't go that bad.
We did.
We could go farther.
But like just so people know, like we didn't have the detail of who kidnapped her, but it's just an overall vibe we're presenting. When we get into like the specific stuff about her adult life, we're going to have specifics. But for now, it's just like her life was chaotic. Here's some ways in which it was chaotic.
It is important to be specific on the Pope because it gets real confusing real quick. This is Pope Clement, her uncle Pope Clement, the 7th.
And that's who she was sent to live with after all this kidnapping, followed by almost being a human sacrifice. She went to live with the Pope, her uncle Pope.
Yeah. But then he died. No. You have a mistake here, so I want to correct this. He died, and then her other uncle became Pope.
Okay.
Now, other Uncle Pope, she's still living in Vatican with other Uncle Pope, and then he wants to take advantage of having a spare niece sitting around.
Yes, exactly. So she's growing up and like, it's just the whole thing we've talked about so many times. It's like, here's this little girl and they know that she's valuable to make some sort of alliance connection with somebody, probably somebody royal, right? So when she was 14 years old, she was promised to Prince Henry of France.
Do you know who else tried for her?
Who?
James of Scotland.
James of Scotland, the one who married Marie de Guise. Yeah, he was
James of Scotland. He was looking. He had two chances, and so I think this was try number one. So could you imagine? This is sliding glass door number one.
Whoa. Yeah.
Is Catherine de Medici gets shipped all the way to Scotland?
Catherine de Medici versus the Scottish lords would be. I don't know.
That would be beautiful.
I don't know.
Catherine de Medici versus John Knox.
Oh, God. Oh, she would. Can I say about John Knox as well? So it's nice having you back again after we just did the Marie de Guise episodes, because we talked in that about how during one of her victories against John Knox, Marie de Guise said, "Where is your God now, John Knox?" And I've had like at least 3 people, including you, suggest that I should make a sticker or a t-shirt that says, "Where's your God now, John Knox?" And if you think I should do that, let me know.
I need that sticker. So please tell her she needs to do that.
Yeah. So one of the people who suggested it was like, this is super niche, but I really need it. And I was like, it kind of delights me to think of people just wearing "Where's your God now, John Knox" t-shirt to the grocery store or something. No one would know, but I would know. So she's promised to Prince Henry of France, who at this point was, I think, not the heir to the throne. Because he was the one, in one of my pandemic super special episodes, his brother was the dumbass who went and had a pillow fight in a house with plague in it and then died of plague.
Yes.
Right. That was his older brother who was technically.
That was his older brother.
Yeah. Yeah.
Who was heir to the throne. So she was getting the second son, which again, he wasn't a dumbass. None of this would have happened.
I need to emphasize, like, go back and listen to that. I did an episode, it's like 10 minutes long or something, but about when I was just doing these various pandemic stories about plagues. Yeah. And so the older brother of Prince Henry was just like, they went into a village that had been ravaged by the plague. Everyone in the village was dead. And then he started jumping around on the beds and like having literally a pillow fight with the bedding. And then he died of plague. That was his brother. So
because nobody knew about germ theory yet.
I feel like some people in Newton maybe not do that. Anyway, so she's marrying, and there's another older brother too, right? Who died in the tennis accident.
Yes. They were not very good at being alive.
No.
The Valois at the end were just kind of falling apart.
I think the Valois throughout. Anyway, so she was promised to Prince Henry of France, who was also her same age, which I like to point out because that's so rare. That a 14-year-old girl is married to a 14-year-old boy. It's usually married to a 35-year-old.
Yeah, but it didn't turn out well for her. He was a messy 14-year-old boy.
Oh, yes, because Henry had been kidnapped and held hostage for several years, and he was big traumatized from that. He was described as like he wasn't a happy person or something like, but like it was more than, he was described as like he's not a happy person. He's very melancholy. It's like, yeah, he's got like major PTSD, depression, like he's dealing with a lot here.
So, very weird side note on this one. Henry's dad borrowed Leonardo da Vinci from Catherine's family and had him come visit for a while.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
And so Leonardo da Vinci was in France when Henry was a young man. Does that remind you of anything?
Explain what that should remind people of.
The movie Ever After?
Oh.
Henry II is the love interest in Ever After.
Oh. So is Drew Barrymore Catherine de Medici?
Catherine de Medici, I guess.
Fascinating.
But no, but also yes, but also no.
So let me see. So they get married, and when they were 15 years old, Henry fell deeply in love with a 38-year-old woman, Diane de Poitiers, who would become his long-term mistress.
Which is terribly inappropriate, but she was also like a cool person.
She was a cool person. This age gap is interesting. He's 15, she's 38.
If they had a less of an age gap, I would be less weirded out by this.
Yeah. So this, I think she was like his tutor or something. Yeah. I may or may not do an episode about Diane later, but she's a main character now in this story, so get ready.
She's central for the early parts of the story.
Yeah, and so he was in love with her, and that bummed Catherine out because he also started to sort of elevate Diane to, who was like a noble woman and stuff. And anyway, so Catherine was kind of like, I get the impression, I don't remember if I read this, but she's kind of short. She's kind of like plain. And Diane de Poitiers was like glamorous and beautiful and 38. So, she's like a self-actualized adult person. Catherine is 15. Anyway, and so the thing is, the whole point of this marriage is, she should have children. But of course, she did not have children for, in fact, 10 years. 10 years.
Which was probably not her fault.
Oh, clearly not her fault, given how many children she would start having eventually.
Yeah, it was Henry's messed up dick.
Okay, let's talk about this. Actually, no, we're gonna get to the dick.
We'll get there.
We'll get there. So she's 15 and she is not getting pregnant. And Henry had, not with Diane, but he had with somebody else. Like he had fathered a child. So like we knew that he was.
So now they blame her.
Yeah. So, but people like in general would always blame the woman anyway. Mm-hmm. People started seeing her as like a natural, maybe a witch. She's also from Florence.
And a moneylender.
So everyone's just kind of like, oh, like any goodwill that she had faded away over these like subsequent 10 years. I want to mention one of Henry's illegitimate children was an ancestor of Jean de la Motte from the Affair of the Necklace. And that is where I think her claim to thinking her family should be royal came from. So divorce and annulment started to be discussed because it's like, again, 10 years.
Well, and she also, her uncles were no longer Pope. Her family was kind of falling out. They weren't done yet, but they weren't as powerful as they had been, having been beaten by the Habsburgs.
Yeah, so she was like politically, like the influence-wise, like the de Medicis weren't so useful. She was not having children, which was like the one thing she could do to solidify her job. And it's not like she was sitting around for 10 years being like, wow, I guess I'm not having a baby. Like she did everything she could think of, like folk remedies, which again added to the rumors of like, oh, is she a witch because she's from Florence and likes magic and herbs?
Well, and because her uncle isn't Pope, they can potentially get a divorce. Like if her uncle was still Pope, there's no way they're getting any sort of divorce. So they got to do it now before another de Medici ends up being Pope, which of course will happen.
Exactly. But this is like, could potentially be another sliding doors moment if he had divorced or annulled this marriage, like what would have happened? But French history, very different. But what happened is Catherine went and she went to Diane de Poitiers for she like investigated. She's like, okay, he's able to clearly have sex with like to completion with Diane. So she like put holes in the walls so she could watch them having sex to be like, oh, okay, that's how they're doing it. She turned to Diane for like advice. Diane was like, okay, try this position, blah, 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 which potentially is, he had a weird shaped dick.
Henry had a weird shaped dick.
He may or may not have had a weird shaped dick. So, and I think part of it is also just like Henry was not attracted to Catherine.
He wasn't trying very hard.
And he was in love with Diane. So anyway.
But it was his job.
Yeah.
It was his job. His job was to have kids with his wife.
And he was not doing it. But also he's ages 15 to 25. Now, I don't want to say they became a throuple, but Diane became sort of like sex coach for them. And so they became sort of a team. Like Henry would like warm up with Diane and then run over to Catherine for like the ejaculation. So anyway, with Diane's help and mentorship and sex coaching, Catherine became pregnant and they had a son who was called Francis. And they would, I'm not going to go over every time a child is born, but they went on to have 9 more children, 6 of whom survived infancy.
Some of whom shouldn't have.
Francis. So I might have to call him Francis.
It was also Diane's job to make sure that they're like, everybody in France wanted there to be heirs.
Yeah.
It was important for the stability of the country. So she's not like doing this entirely out of the kindness of her heart.
No.
Like, oh, poor Catherine, the wife at home, if only she had kids. It's like, no, this is for France. Like, we're all doing our jobs here.
Yeah, exactly. Like for France, like we need to have some children. So they had a son. Hooray. Like, divorce no longer in the cards. We're going to leave you there for today. Little cliffhanger for you. Next week, we're going to get into more of the Catherine de Medici story. And so in the meantime, if you're, I don't know, if this is like your first episode of this podcast you've listened to, there's lots of other ones. There's a whole archive. You can listen to all of them, or if you listen to podcasts. If you want to keep up with me, I'm on Instagram at Vulgar History Pod. I'm also on TikTok at Vulgar History. I'm having a nice time on TikTok. It took a minute for me to kind of find the people who get my vibe. But anyway, I'm enjoying it there. I'm doing I figured out how to do longer videos, but I also do shorter videos. Whatever. If you're on TikTok, whatever, I'm there. You can also reach out to me if you have thoughts or comments or questions about Catherine de Medici or any other episodes or about Mary Queen of Scots. If you go to vulgarhistory.com, there's a form there to contact me as well. You can email me at vulgarhistorypod@gmail.com. I'm also on Patreon, which is a place where if you make recurrent monthly donations, you get extra bonus stuff. So if you pledge at least $1 a month, you get early ad-free access to all episodes of Vulgar History. If you pledge at least $2 a month, you get that, but also access to some polls. Like I just did a March Madness a while ago, which was fun. If you pledge at least $5 or more a month, you get access to bonus episodes. So that is where I do episodes about some terrible men from history called So This Asshole. I also do episodes of Vulgar Piece Theater. That's where I talk about costume dramas at length. Vulgar Piece Theater episodes are like 3.5 hours long. But that's where I'm joined by today's guest, Lana Wood Johnson, as well as our friend Alison Epstein, and we talk about costume dramas. The most recent one we're doing is about Corsage, the Empress Sisi movie. We've also previously, I think Lana mentioned in this episode, we did, maybe it's in the next episode, we've also talked about Queen Margot, the sexy 90s French movie that features Catherine de Medici lurking lurkily in the shadows. We also have Vulgar History merchandise at vulgarhistory.store, where you can always use code TITSOUT for free US shipping, or TITSOUT10 for 10% off. And until next time, my friends, keep your pants on and your tits out. Vulgar History is hosted, written, and researched by Anne Foster and edited by Christina Lumagi.
Talmor, Shishin Murachi. Talmor is my home. My family have worked the land for generations. My gran says the island does not belong to us, but we belong to the island. And we must be ready, for a great evil is coming, and death follows with it.
Listen and subscribe to the latest season of Undertow, The Harrowing, a Storyglass production presented by Realm, available wherever you get your podcasts.
Hi, this is Rob Benedict.
And I am Richard Spate. We were both on a little show you might know called Supernatural.
It had a pretty good run, 15 seasons, 327 episodes.
And though we have seen, of course, every episode many times, we figured, hey, now that we're wrapped, let's watch it all again.
And we can't do that alone. So we're inviting the cast and crew that made the show along for the ride. We've got writers, producers, composers, directors, and we'll of course have some actors on as well, including some certain guys that played some certain pretty iconic brothers.
It was kind of a little bit of a left field choice in the best way possible.
The note from Kripke was, he's great, we love him, but we're looking for like a really intelligent Duchovny type.
With 15 seasons to explore, it's going to be the road trip of several lifetimes. So please join us and subscribe to Supernatural then and now.